Liam Ford walked in the heat of the afternoon sun, his heart racing with every step. Beside him, his dog Rocky, a black and tan German Shepherd, was jumping around happily, just as excited. This dog was a gift from his father to mark his passage into adulthood, and he was incredibly proud of it. Rocky, with his bright eyes and boundless energy, was his perfect companion. As they turned onto a quiet street in their neighborhood, Liam couldn't help but smile, his eyes fixed on his dog who walked proudly beside him. He had spent the last few weeks teaching her tricks, strengthening their bond. Rocky obeyed perfectly, and passers-by couldn't help but glance at the duo admiringly. He felt good, serene, as if this simple moment was the embodiment of freedom, complicity, and pure joy. The warmth of the sun was nothing compared to the radiance of this moment shared with Rocky, his faithful friend. Every step they took together seemed to carry with it the weight of daily concerns. Liam needed nothing more than her company and the tranquility of this neighborhood he knew by heart. The tranquility of their walk was abruptly interrupted when a police car slowed, then stopped near the sidewalk. Liam, who hadn't noticed anything unusual until then, looked up and saw the car. His eyebrows furrowed slightly as he looked at the police car, an old sedan with worn tires that didn't fit the typical image of a patrol vehicle. He turned his gaze to Rocky, who also seemed intrigued by the sudden stop, ears pricked, ready to defend his master if necessary. A policeman got out of the car. Officer Martin. He was a well-known face in the neighborhood, but not for good reasons. Martin had a reputation for being authoritarian, and even more so, for being prejudiced against those who, like Liam, seemed not to fit his idea of a good citizen. Each encounter with him seemed to be a test, a latent confrontation, a silent war where injustice was often the armor he wore. Martin walked towards them with a heavy, measured step, and without saying a word, he fixed Rocky with a piercing gaze. The dog, still calm and sure of himself, held her gaze without flinching. Liam felt a small wave of nervousness run through his body, although he didn't want to admit it. The man then turned to him, his expression marked by a form of quiet arrogance. "Is this dog yours? How much did you pay to walk him?" Martin asked in a condescending tone, crossing his arms, a mocking smile on his lips. His voice was heavy with innuendo, and his eyes, cold and skeptical, seemed to search for a flaw in Liam's face, as if he wanted to detect the slightest weakness. Liam, shocked by the question, shook his head in disbelief. "No one paid me, it's mine. It's a gift from my father." The officer raised his eyebrows, as if he hadn't heard correctly, or as if this kind of response was an insult to his sense of order. "A gift, huh? A boy like you. How can you afford a dog like that?" Martin's smile grew wider, turning into a cruel grin. "You know, these dogs aren't for everyone. You don't even seem to be able to afford them." Martin's words rang through the air, hung and heavy with judgment. Liam felt anger rising within him, a dull, intense anger that he knew he had to contain. He was used to these little barbs, the way he was reduced to a caricature, but today it was different. He wasn't just a boy wandering the streets. He was a man, an adult, and Rocky was his equal, his friend, not just an accessory for display. With implacable calm, Liam stood up, looked the officer in the eyes, and replied in a firm voice, "I assure you, he is mine, and I have nothing to prove to anyone." He paused, feeling that every word, every syllable, had to be weighed. "My dad gave me Rocky because he knows I can take care of him. It's not about money or status. It's about loyalty and respect." But the officer's suspicion does not weaken. Getting closer and closer to Liam, he took one step too far. "So you stole this dog?" he said, his gaze menacing, his black eyes filled with cold and implacable distrust. Liam felt his stomach twist into a knot of anxiety. The weight of the question, as absurd as it was, hit like a punch. "No, I didn't steal it. It's mine," he replied, his voice shaking with stress, but he managed to make it firm. He tried to control his breathing, to keep his voice from betraying the fear that was beginning to creep inside him. At his side, Rocky sensed his master's concern and placed himself slightly forward, his muscles tense, his teeth bared, his gaze fixed on the officer with an intensity that escaped no one. The dog, protective and loyal, stood ready to defend his friend, and that piercing gaze would be enough to make any man nervous. Liam, realizing the palpable tension between the officer and his dog, quickly knelt down to calm Rocky. "It's okay, Rocky, stay calm," he whispered softly, his hand brushing the German Shepherd's fur, trying to convey to him that there was no immediate danger. But Officer Martin, caught up in his paranoia and arrogance, didn't seem ready to give in. "You want him to attack me, right?" Officer Martin said sharply, his eyes growing darker and darker. With a sudden movement, he removed his weapon from his belt. The metal of the weapon glinted in the sunlight, and a cold shiver ran down Liam's spine. "I'm going to defend myself, and I'm going to shoot if I have to." The words hit Liam like an icy wave. "No, he's not attacking you," he shouted in a panic, pulling on the leash to prevent Rocky from making the slightest movement towards the officer. He felt fear growing inside him, the desire to protect his dog and defuse the situation, fighting against the instinct to flee. But everything happened too quickly, too suddenly. The officer, panicked by Rocky's rapid movement, pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot tore through the air like an explosion, a piercing crash that seemed to suspend time itself. Liam didn't have time to react. He lunged forward as Rocky collapsed to the ground, a strangled cry escaping his master's throat. "Rocky!" Liam yelled, tears immediately filling his eyes, his heart ready to burst. He knelt beside his dog, struggling to contain the terror and pain that filled his mind. The dog had stopped breathing, his head lowered to the ground, his eyes fixed on Liam in one last look of loyalty, of silent understanding. "No, no!" Liam shouted, his voice breaking, his body racked with sobs. He hugged Rocky's head, the warmth of his body still present, but already smothered by the coldness of reality. This dog, his friend, his faithful companion, had just been taken from him in a violent and unjust manner. But the officer, cold and detached, showed no form of remorse. His eyes shone not with guilt, but with a kind of cold indifference. He just spoke words that hit Liam like stones thrown into a turbulent river. "You attempted to attack an officer. You are under arrest for endangering an officer." Liam, devastated, felt the heat of pain wash over him, making him almost unable to breathe. He didn't understand what had just happened. The loss of Rocky, the loss of his best friend, devastated him. And yet, at that precise moment, what struck him even more was the injustice of the situation. The officer hadn't even tried to understand, to calm the situation, or to see what really happened. He was already ready to accuse her of everything, to reverse the roles. Without warning, the officer violently grabbed Liam by the arm, nearly lifting him off the ground with disproportionate force. Liam, still crouched, refused to leave his dog's head, but the officer pulled him mercilessly, taking him towards the police car. The pain in his arm was an insignificant detail compared to the tear in his heart. He struggled weakly, but the officer's grip was too strong. "No, I want to stay with him," he whispered in a broken voice, tears streaming endlessly down his cheeks. He could no longer tell the difference between physical pain and emotional pain. Everything was confused, everything was black, everything seemed irreparably broken. The implacable officer ignored him, and without another word threw him into the patrol vehicle. The doors closed with a sharp sound, a metallic click that symbolized the end of this tragic encounter. Liam found himself in the car, his hands cuffed, his eyes staring into space, his thoughts lost in a whirlwind of rage and sadness. Rocky was there, lying limp, far from him, but his memory still burned in his mind, his loyalty, his unconditional love. All of it couldn't be erased. The police car's siren wailed, breaking the oppressive silence. But in Liam's mind, everything had gone silent. Everything except the memory of Rocky and the pain of a life now marked by injustice and loss. At the police station, Liam was left alone in a cell, his wrists aching from the handcuffs biting into his skin. The silence was oppressive, heavy, almost suffocating. Each breath felt like an effort, as if the air had become thicker since the incident. The images of Rocky, his beloved dog, falling to the ground, his body lifeless, would haunt him forever. It wasn't just a vision that kept coming back. It was raw pain, a deep wound in his soul. He relived that moment over and over again, unable to escape it. His mind, shattered by pain, kept repeating to itself that it was just a bad dream, that it would all go away eventually. But he knew, deep down, that this wasn't a nightmare. It was reality. The cruelest truth he had ever known. Liam curled into himself in the small cell, his head in his hands, fighting against the tears that threatened to overwhelm him. His heart was pounding, and every thought, every memory of Rocky, only drove the pain deeper. He couldn't even understand how he had gotten there, how everything had changed so quickly. He had only been walking his dog in the neighborhood, and now he found himself locked up, wrongly accused, with the lifeless body of his dog as the only proof of the injustice he had just experienced. A few hours later, while he was still weighed down by the weight of pain and humiliation, the cell door suddenly opened. Liam looked up, hoping, half-heartedly, that someone was finally coming to help him. And there, in the doorway, stood his father. David Ford, an FBI agent, a respected man, a father who could not bear to see his son suffer. David didn't have all the information yet, but the worry weighing on his shoulders told him something was wrong. He didn't need detailed explanations to know that this situation was not ordinary. When he heard Liam's call, he immediately knew that what had happened was more than just an unfortunate coincidence. Without saying a word, David walked towards his son, his voice firm but full of tenderness. He placed a hand on Liam's shoulder, a gesture of comfort. "What happened, Liam?" he asked softly, although pain and worry marked his every word. Liam, unable to contain his grief, burst into tears. He tearfully recounted what had happened, how he had been wrongly accused of ordering Rocky to attack the officer. He explained how he had felt helpless, trapped by a situation he had not created, and that the only thing left of that day was the irreparable loss of his dog. "Dad, they shot Rocky. The officer said I ordered him to attack. But I didn't," he sobbed, his voice cracking with pain and frustration. David, despite his growing anger, remained calm. "I'll take care of it." "Where are you, Liam?" he responded immediately, his voice calm but full of determination. He knew this was not a simple error of judgment on the part of a police officer. This situation went well beyond the incident with the dog. It was a question of justice. David Ford, as methodical as ever, picked up his phone and immediately called his contacts in the higher echelons of justice and the police. He was not going to allow this kind of injustice to happen without accountability. A few minutes later, he hung up, his eyes filled with resolution and certainty. He got up and went straight to the police station, leaving nothing to chance. When he arrived, the atmosphere in the police station was tense. David, in a firm voice, demanded answers. "Where is my son?" he asked, his voice ringing through the air like an order. His natural authority pierced the room. Captain Jones, a generally confident man, seemed slightly hesitant under David's piercing gaze. He explained the situation, of course, but David didn't give in. "That's not what my son told me," he replied in a low but menacing voice, the words ringing like a warning. "Your officer shot an innocent dog." "Why?" Officer Martin, who had just entered the room, shrugged his shoulders dismissively, as if expecting to be exonerated. "He provoked the dog to attack me. I had no choice. I acted for my safety," he affirmed in a voice full of certainty. David stared at him with an icy gaze. "And you think shooting an innocent dog was necessary?" he replied, his words laden with palpable menace. He stepped forward slightly, imposing his presence. "The truth will come out, Martin, and you'll have to answer for your actions." Captain Jones, seeing that the situation risked degenerating, offered to view the neighborhood surveillance videos. David didn't even respond, his gaze fixed entirely on Officer Martin. The latter, who seemed more and more uncomfortable, began to doubt the validity of his defense. Time seemed to stand still in the room, and David knew he had won this battle, even before he saw the evidence. When the footage was shown, it showed the entire scene, Liam calmly walking with Rocky, the dog walking proudly alongside him. Officer Martin, outside of his role of authority, had appeared for no good reason, accosting the duo with an aggressive attitude. Everything escalated quickly, with the officer not trying to defuse the situation, but instead choosing violence. The shooting was completely unjustified, and the videos showed unambiguously that Liam never ordered his dog to attack. The evidence was overwhelming. Officer Martin could not sustain his defense. Faced with the clarity of the images, he had no choice but to remain silent, and the authorities could only note the seriousness of the act. The court decided to suspend Officer Martin from duty, while Liam's arrest was found to be illegal. However, even though the court had ruled in his favor, the pain of Rocky's loss remained. No suspension, no court decision could bring back his friend, his faithful companion. Liam had won the legal battle, but the emotional war was far from over. The scar of that day, of that irreparable loss, would stay with him forever. He felt marked, transformed by the injustice he had experienced. But thanks to his father's unwavering support, Liam knew that at least the truth had come to light. And although the pain of losing Rocky was immense and indelible, he knew that he could always count on David, who had supported him through the most difficult ordeal of his life.